let's jump in to talk a little bit about, what is Inscribe and what is our philosophy when it comes to student support and engagement. There are obviously many strategies and many tools that are out there that can help serve the purpose of supporting and helping improve outcomes for learners. The approach that we take is one of really leaning into, first and foremost, human connection. And then beyond that, really thinking about how peer connection and peer engagement can help facilitate this process. So, Inscribe is a virtual community platform. We create digital spaces where students can connect to talk to each other, get advice, also maybe connect with individuals from your institution, coaches, advisors, even faculty. But really, what it comes down to is that we will always describe ourselves as human first, technology enabled. So, we'll talk a little bit about the tech that sits within and behind Inscribe, which does include some AI. But at the end of the day, we believe that it's the relationships that people are building that help them not only develop a sense of confidence and a sense of belonging, but also create the scaffolding that these individuals need when they have a question, when they need help. They now know who they can reach out to for that feedback to help them get through those difficult times. So we're really about fostering and strengthening the relationships. We focus particularly with online students because unlike a traditional student who's maybe on campus for 4 years and is living in a dorm and is having dinner in a dining hall, our online learners don't have those serendipitous moments when they can just bump into people or build relationships opportunistically. And for many years, actually, I think um, the sort of need of online learners to have that social network was discounted in a lot of places across the industry. There's sort of a sense that, well, if you're learning online, it's a transactional experience. You're a non-traditional learner, so you're working, you're parenting, you've got a million other things going on. Education is important, but it's not the only thing that's important in your life. And therefore, making these peer connections was not really something that those students were looking for. But actually, we've sort of known because many of us have worked in the online space for a long time, that what we were hearing for students was that that's not really the case. And many of our partners will say that they have done recently or in the past 5 years surveys with those students. And the number one thing that comes back from those is, I wish there was a more opportunity for me to know other people in my program. I wish there were other ways for me to connect with people across my institution. And the reality is, those relationships are strengthening. They do help students build confidence. They do help with stickiness and belonging, which can lead to persistence. So that's what we really focus on. And there's two main things that sit underneath that we believe really drive those positive outcomes that we'll talk about a little bit later. One is that concept that I've already mentioned of sense of belonging. So many of you are probably familiar with this, but just the idea that as a learner, I'm valued at my institution and by my peers. Um, I have my place there. I know that I can bring my authentic self to that space. When I'm learning online and I'm alone and I don't have exposure to other students, except maybe for some of the work I'm doing in my classroom, developing that sense of connection can be difficult. So we have to be a little more intentional with those learners about how we create systems that can enable sense of belonging and strengthen that for them. The second side of this coin, which is something that we're really excited about, is the concept of social capital. They're obviously related, but social capital is more about the network of people that I've built, that I know that I can trust and turn to when I need advice, when I need a new opportunity. And likewise, that they can turn to me and I'm able to provide those sorts of support for them. I think if we all reflect on our post-secondary journey, the education we got in the classroom was a huge part of that experience. But the people that we met, the relationships that we developed, were almost equally important and probably helped many of us as we moved beyond our education into our career and started to think about the networks we could rely on there as well. So with online, again, because we don't have as much exposure to other folks at the institution, the ability to build those networks is weakened. And as a non-traditional student, many come without the experience of networking that they may have had, if in the neighborhoods that they grew up with the families that they grew up with. And so it's a skill that we kind of need to teach as part of the post-secondary experience and then make sure they have the opportunities to build that network. So those are two things that the community does really well. Bringing people together, helping them understand why relationships are valuable and how to um, leverage those relationships both to help others and to get help when we need it. Um, so as I mentioned, I think this is the kind of space where for a lot of years it felt very not something that was necessarily needed and a little bit sort of how do we measure this? How do we know that's really working? Is it something that we really need to invest in? Post-pandemic is when I think a lot of institutions really started to lean into more surveys and experiential surveys with their students and get that feedback that yes, this is actually critical. This is actually something that's important. And we have developed ways to measure these things through surveys and through student feedback so that it creates a more quantitative experience and not just a qualitative assessment. So in this emerging world where so many students are learning at a distance, the vast majority of our learners fall into that non-traditional bucket. Upwards of 75% of post-secondary students now are quote unquote non-traditional. It's really important that we're thinking about strategies that are really optimized specifically for them so that they can be successful and so our institutions can be successful. Many of you are probably maybe traditional schools that are now focusing on online or looking at online as a place for growth. So let's make sure that the tool set that you're using will help you be successful in those endeavors as well. We mentioned the vast majority of students fall into this category. And if you are a school that works with online learners, or if you have both in person and online, you probably have noticed that retention in the online space is harder. And it's for many of the reasons we already discussed. Yes, these are individuals who are very, very busy. And so although education is important, it's not the only priority. So when things get hard, when things get confusing, when I feel like I'm running up against barriers I don't know how to overcome, um, it's easier to maybe set the education aside. So we have to be extra diligent about making sure that our online learners have simple access to information, can easily connect with the people that they want to and need to connect with. We almost have to over emphasize those pathways to services and support that maybe our more traditional students just get because they live nearby or they can drop in when they need it. So let's talk a little bit about how we think about student support. I mentioned early on that there's many mechanisms to think about student success. And when we visualize what a student success ecosystem is, we kind of think about it as this pyramid. And at the bottom of the pyramid are interventions that are inexpensive to deliver, that can be delivered easily to many, many students across the university and probably or college and have application for all of those learners. As we move up the pyramid, the interventions get a little bit more expensive. And we find that not every one of our learners really needs that intervention to succeed. So we need fewer of those, but they're going to cost more to deliver. So think about at the bottom, we're talking about text messages, emails, automated outreach. Then as we move up, it's things like websites and places students can go to find solutions on their own. Then we have more many-to-many or asynchronous interventions that students can tap into. Our community is a great example. And then finally, one-to-one interventions like I'm going to sit down with my advisor or my coach or my tutor. But to have a really successful student success strategy, what we really need is to be able to apply interventions at all of these levels and have them work together so students can kind of move between intervention levels really seamlessly without having to jump to a new application or jump to a new tool. So that's one of the things that we focus on with Inscribe. How can our communities actually help you deliver all four levels of intervention in one comprehensive system so that you only have to pay for one platform? You only have to implement and support the integration of one platform, and your students know there's one place to go no matter what they need. They don't, again, have to jump out to 6 different places to get the solutions that they're looking for. And that's really what a peer community is. So we mentioned it's a digital space where students come. They're going to come here to ask questions, to maybe connect with the critical resources at your school, their success coach, their student advisor. It's where they're building relationships with their peers to talk about whatever it is that they want to talk about, whether it's their dog that they just got or, the calculus test that's coming up in a few days. The other thing that's really unique is about Inscribe is we understand that communities are also knowledge repositories. So yes, they are social spaces where somebody wants to come and meet and get an answer to a question. But think about it this way. Um, Once that question has been answered, there's no reason that the next student that comes along should have to ask that question again. And there's no reason that you should have to answer it a second time. One of the things we hear all the time is there's 10 questions that every single student has when they start on day one. And we get that same question 20, 30, 100 times every semester. But when you move all of that into this shared space, you can answer that question once. And then when a student comes with the same question, the system will essentially automatically direct the student to that solution. So we're really focused on the reusability of content along with the social aspects of what can happen in a community. All right, let me pause for a second, Danielle. Been doing a lot of talking. Any questions that have popped up in the chat? Anything that you would want to add here?
We don't have any questions at this point in time. I dropped some links in the chat. So I put in there the personalized persistence framework to the blog
Oh,
post you did
great.
last year. I also dropped in some LinkedIn links to connect with all of us. Did that a little late, so I apologize for that. But at this point, we're no questions, but I would encourage everyone to drop their questions in the chat as we continue along.
Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so we have these spaces. They're integrated into into the tools that schools are already using. I've told you that they're going to do all these amazing things, but let's look at some of the results that our partners are actually seeing and some of the ways that they have implemented Inscribe. So we'll start with Rio. Rio Salado is a community college in Arizona. Some of you might be familiar. One of the things that was unique about Rio Salado is that it started as essentially a fully online community college. So they do have a little bit of in-person today, but the vast majority of their students come to them online. So they have this double challenge of many, many part-time learners, but also those learners are at a distance. So it's it's even more difficult to kind of engage them and get them connected over the long term. I believe Rio's at about 14,000 students today. So when they came to us, they were looking for a way to help build relationships with their students who were coming in and out, who may never set foot on campus, so that they could improve persistence, but also make the students feel more like a member of their community. And we worked together and we launched Rio Connect, which is their Inscribe community. And they opened that community up to all their students. So they just said, we're not going to isolate this to an individual program, but if you're a member of the Rio Salado College community, you're a member of the Rio Connect community. And then we partnered with an outside organization to do a study around how that community impacted specifically sense of belonging and peer connection at their institution. And the results that we got were unbelievable. So we launched the community. We did a sort of a pre-survey of students to see where their baseline was across these items. And then about 4 weeks later, we did a second survey to see where those things may have changed. And what we found was as students engaged with the community, their sense of belonging and peer connection dramatically increased in only a few weeks. So you can see the results here, 40% higher sense of belonging, almost a 15% increase in their sense of peer connectedness in just this short time frame. So what I love about this study is not only does it demonstrate and validate that a space like this can move the needle on those measures, but it's not a full year or a 5 year investment that you have to make to start to see those outcomes. It really is something that works very, very quickly. And then you can have, and then by having it consistent across the university, you can maintain those levels of positive outcome. Also, it's a great statistic here, just because people also say to us, well, my students are a little bit older. I don't think they're going to be into this type of technology. You can see the average age here was 56. That's a little higher than the average age at some of our partners, but it does demonstrate, and we do see time and time again, older students, 30s, 40s, even 50s, really connect to these spaces. They're the ones that almost more than anything are looking for people to connect with, because they're coming back maybe after a big gap in their learning, or maybe they had an unsuccessful attempt at education early on. And so knowing that there's other people out there like them, kind of with similar background and struggles, is very reassuring and really helps combat that imposter syndrome that some of those learners can have. Um, Next, we'll talk about University of Maryland Global Campus. So slightly different setup. UMGC fully online, for the most part, fully online. Um, I think they're at 65,000 students total across the university. And something that made them really unique is that they have a huge number of military students. So they're not just online, but they're literally all over the world, and kind of coming in and out of their education depending on what's happening with their career at that moment. So they faced a very similar challenge to Rio, which is, how do we onboard these students effectively, make them feel instantaneously like they're part of the UMGC community, and help them ramp in and onboard into their degree really, really effectively. So we partner with them to create what they call the UMGC PACE community. So PACE for them is their very first course that every student takes before they launch into their degree. And it's essentially the course that teaches you how to learn online. Um, and so it was a great starting place. We're essentially catching all these individuals right when they start. And because every student is going through it, it was a really interesting cross section of students and a high volume of students coming through. You can see 8,000 students coming through in the couple of terms that we ran this study. And again, the outcomes were off the charts. So we improved the success rate in that course, which, remember, this is a gateway course to your education. So if you're not completing PACE successfully, you are not converting on to continue your degree. So improving that by 13%, a 19% improvement in the success, the number of people that were getting A grades, so mastering the content. And then watching those students then in terms of how many are transferring on to persist and continue in their degree, a huge uptick in the number of learners. And what I love about this is it's not only is this wonderful for the students, because they're making an investment of time and money, right? So we don't want to see them make that initial investment and then not have the opportunity to capitalize on it by completing the degree. But it also is a huge benefit for UMGC. They're pulling these students in. Every student that leaves in that first semester is one more student that they have to bring in next semester to help meet their enrollment requirements. So we're really able to serve both the institution and the students' interests simultaneously with a very simple solution.
Hey, Katie, real quick,
Yeah,
can you address not implementation, excuse me, integration and how students
yeah.
are accessing these communities? And then I also thought it would be really great to talk about how the community is branded to the institution, so that it's just an extension of the brand in the campus life.
Yes, thank you. And you can see here integrated with Brightspace. So we really designed the Inscribe community to feel like an extension of your college or university. And that there's two ways that we do that. One, as Daniel alluded to, is the branding. I think we even had a better example up here. So when we launch your community, your logo, your colors, the design of the space is going to carry forward your brand. And then when you think about the community name, you'll name it something that resonates with your students. A lot of our partners will use a mascot or something else. But again, it's sort of, we want this to feel like you own it, We are just the powered by model that's helping to drive it, but your students will feel your brand and your personality when they come into these spaces. The other way that we support that is through integration. So, in terms of accessing the Inscribe community, we don't want it sitting off to the side. We don't want it to be something students have to go hunt for when they need it. We really want it to be integrated into the workflows you already have. So, LMS is a very common integration point, but also, do you have a student portal? Do you have a mobile app? What websites are students going to? Let's create access points for your students in all of those places. And then using single sign on, click on that link. They're going to jump into their Inscribe community using your credentials, and it all feels like a seamless experience to them.
Thank
Is that
you.
helpful? Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to, do we have, okay. So last one is the one that we were looking at in terms of the branding, which is with University of North Texas. Um, Here, they have a huge in-person population and a huge and growing online population. And what they were finding was it was a little unwieldy to manage the communication of information and connection of their student success coaches and others with their online students because there were so many and it was growing so quickly. So we helped them launch their community, which they called Talon to Talon, which is named after, sort of associated with their mascot, and integrated it into the student orientation and onboarding process. So as soon as students got into the program, they were introduced to the community. They could meet each other, start to get to know who was there, but also had access to their coaches in this space. And what was great about it is not only could students meet each other and start to help each other out and learn about and start to build those relationships, but it created a really scalable solution for the coaches. Because if they wanted to get information out, if they had a question that they wanted to get answered, they could do it in this space. And now it's not just one student that was benefiting from that information, it was every student coming in. So it was that scalability and that peer connection happening simultaneously. And the outcomes there were, again, so impressive. They did a fall to fall term um, comparison study. And the year that they implemented Inscribe, their persistence rates for fall to spring went up 13%. So again, simple solution, easy to get up and running, and the benefits you see are significant and quick to come. Any other questions that have popped in, Danielle?
There is a question in the chat about showing the impact on student retention. I was looking for a case study because I believe we have a case study with WGU in the IT space. Do you have any? We don't have that example in here, but can you maybe tell a little bit about that story?
Yeah, so one of our other partners we've worked with is Western Governors University. There's so and and we did a study. I think we do have that case study with them looking at student persistence and completion. Their model's a little different because they're using a competency-based model. So the way that they look at student success is how quickly are students moving through their courses and are they then signing up or competency and then are they signing up for the next competency? And we were able to demonstrate a dramatic reduction in the number of students who are just dropping out and leaving once they implemented the Inscribe community. So if you can find that, that would be great, Danielle. And if do you want to just drop the link to our at some point we can drop the link to the web page that has all the case studies on it. It'll include this and some other ones around things like retention and efficiency and different case study or different use cases that some schools have put together.
So there's a kind of a follow-up to that. So what metrics or evaluation methods were used to isolate the platform's contributions from other variables?
So that's never going to be a perfect system. And so the main way that, and so I should say two things. Number one is the studies that you see here were all done by our partners. So we provide to them, or they have access to all of the engagement data from their communities in terms of who's in there, how active everybody is, what they're doing. And then they will use that data, combine it with the data they have in their systems around retention, engagement, persistence to come up with these numbers. So These studies were all done by our partners. The primary mechanism of study is what UNT has done, which is sort of a term to term analysis. So here's what we saw in fall of 2024. We implemented Inscribe, and here was what we saw in the fall of 2025. Again, not perfect because there's always going to be a few more variables, but to see something this dramatic after that change indicates that there is some contribution that Inscribe is making that's significant to get to that number. In the case of the sense of belonging study, that was a study that was put together again by an outside group, an independent party, and they used if I get this correct, quasi-experimental pre-post survey design. So it was the same set of learners, but it evaluated before you engaged with the community, after you had engaged a little bit, and then the post survey looked at people who had engaged the full time, people who hadn't engaged at all and then started to engage, people who never engaged, and compared those notes. So that's a full research study that we can share as well.
There's another question in the chat. Can you share a little bit about the academic support use case? There's some questioning about if it's an AI tool and if there's maybe, AI that populates resources and answers questions, or is this more faculty driven or both?
Yes, so that's a good question. So all the examples that we looked at here are co-curricular peer communities. So they're going to sit at the institution level, or sometimes they would sit at the program level. The second most common use case would be that academic use case. So in that example, or just as an example, that would be building community around college algebra. So all the students that are taking college algebra have a community that they can go to talk about math, for example. Or an individual faculty member, Professor Kapler has decided, I want to build a community for my course. The students can go in there and ask me questions and I can talk to them. While we do have AI built into the platform, the focus of that AI is much more around connecting students to solutions that already exist. So if a question has, as we mentioned, if a question has already been answered, the AI will redirect you there. The AI is not scanning the universe to try and answer that question on its own, if that makes sense. It's going to say, hey, Danielle already answered this question for you, and let me redirect you to where Danielle provided that solution. That's by design. There are plenty of products that are going to generate answers themselves, and there are great use cases for those. But what we saw in our spaces, even in the academic communities, were that knowing that somebody else had asked this question, and because I thought maybe I was the only one, but seeing that there was one person, two people, a bunch of people that had this question and talked about it is very reassuring and actually helps improve the confidence of the learner and contributes to their ability to persist. Likewise, if somebody else asks a question and I can jump in to provide support and solution, that is hugely reassuring for myself. It provides a lot of intrinsic motivation for me to feel good about the class that I'm in and the work that I'm doing. So we didn't want to get in the way of that by having the AI be the only thing that is interacting with the individuals. So our focus is very much on human. Sorry, hold on.
I was going to jump in.
I'll point to you in just one sec. Because I was going to add one other thing, which is that the other piece that the AI does is really around kind of measuring the health of these spaces. So it's keeping an eye out to see if a student's getting really frustrated or really upset. And then we can bring in the moderators of the community, the faculty or others, to intervene with that student and maybe help them get past that breaking point. But rather than the student just kind of floundering on their own and nobody really realizing that that's happening maybe until it's a little bit too late. Sorry, Anna, go ahead.
No, sorry, I interrupted. I was just going to add to what Katie was saying about the question answering piece is that it's not just faculty in there answering as well. So one of the other things that we see a lot is students not only seeing, oh, another person has this question, but in some cases, and lots of cases, students jumping in and helping each other. And so then it's not only helping them like, oh, I now have people in my course who can help me. I know now that Katie is going to be a good resource for me. But it makes me feel like as Katie, as the person answering the question, I'm getting validation, I'm helping other people. So it's not just as an instructor, I have to sit there and answer every single question. And in fact, communities in the academic space where we see the most success are where an instructor sets up for them, like, hey, this is your space. We want you to help each other. We're obviously here to jump in as well. But so again, sort of scaling that support without using a bot or something else to try to do that for us.
Thank you. That's great clarification. Anything else pop in, Daniel?
Well, in the chat, it was brought to my attention that the 2 links that are very long do not work. So I've made them shorter, and I will drop them both in the chat. But at this point, we are all caught up in questions, and I think we're going to move along and talk about implementation and customer success.
Perfect. Okay, so one of the things we'll always say is the outcomes are fantastic. The concept works, but if it's too hard or too much for a school to take on, it's not going to be successful. One of the things that we've also invested heavily in is how do we simplify implementation? How do we simplify community launch to make sure that we bring our expertise to the table and can help ensure your success as quickly and easily as possible? So I'm going to have Anna talk a little bit about our implementation process, how we do that, the magic under the hood. And then if you have any questions about that, please jump in and ask those along the way. So Anna, take it away.
Awesome. You're gonna, oh, there we go. Okay, great. So yeah, as Katie mentioned, we are here to support. It's not a terrifically hard product to implement. We also don't expect you to do it on your own. And she talked a little bit about this earlier when she was talking about where you can find and scribe, wanting to be close to where the students are. But what we think about when we're implementing any new community is these 4 Ps. So being really clear with people as they're going through the implementation process about what it is that they're trying to do. So what's the purpose of the community? Making sure we work with you to understand, not only are you really clear about what the purpose is, but how are we going to communicate that with your learners? The people are obviously so important, and not just the people that are going to be the main users of the community, but who are the people that are going to be in there facilitating? I think especially we talked a lot about those peer-to-peer kind of co-curricular spaces. It can feel really overwhelming. Like if I have a school like Rio Salado or UMGC, where Katie mentioned they have such huge enrollment, how am I going to make this work? How am I going to manage this without being overwhelmed by moderation? We have a lot of things in there to make that super easy. So it's not a really big lift. It feels like it might be, but it isn't. So we're looking at not just the people that are being served, but by the people who are going to be actually in there, making sure that things are proceeding and healthy in the way that you want them to be. And then as Katie mentioned, that placement piece being so critical, we really don't want to be this like thing that they heard about, that they know they're supposed to go to. They went there once through maybe a course that they were in, but they can never get back. We really want to be where your learners are so that they can easily get back to the community, whether it's to get help or just to connect. And that can be all kinds of ways, as Katie mentioned, through the portal, through learning management systems, all kinds of wherever your students are, we make it really easy for you to put the Inscribe community in those spots. And then obviously we'll work with you on a plan. So how are you going to communicate this, not only to your students who are going to be in the community, but also to other people in your institution that may want to know? What do your stakeholders need to understand? What are the people who might hear about it from students, but they're not in charge? So, what are the things that you want to do? So we have a lot of framework around all of this to make it happen fairly easily. I would say typically that, the implementation we can have that go as quickly as a couple of weeks, depending on what folks' bandwidths are. So it's not really, we hear a lot from folks when we're implementing, like, this was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be. So it's very straightforward. It's very structured as far as how we get it going. And these are the main things that we work on when we go through that process.
Anna, just because we get this one, we get this question all the time, although stop me if you're going to talk about it later. Like, what is the lift as a mod? Once it's up and running, how much work is it to moderate a space like this, do you think, or in your experience?
Yeah, so I would say even in our busiest communities, and again, it kind of varies. If you're doing an academic support community and it's a topic where students have lots of questions, it's probably going to be less of a lift than answering all those questions via email. So if you can imagine how much time you're spending now addressing questions from students, imagine it's less time. Because as Katie mentioned, if somebody is asking a question, probably 5 to 10 other students have that same question. They're not going to ask it again, so you don't have to get in there. and answer it multiple times like you would via email. So those peer-to-peer spaces, even in those massive communities that we have, and some of them are truly massive, literally tens of thousands of students, you're really only in there checking when things get flagged. And we have technology that will say, hey, this post got flagged. You might want to take a look. We have technology that can automatically hide a post before it gets released into the wild, so to speak, so that if you're not available, you can say like hide posts that meet these certain criteria. So, I know that in one of our larger communities, there's one person that manages all those flags for, I think there's 2 communities with 24,000 students each. And it's not like a full-time job. So it's really manageable just going in. And again, you're not reading every post, you're just checking out things that have been flagged. And it's not, even in those really, really large communities, it's not that big of a lift.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then as we also mentioned, during that implementation process, we are setting up those things that make the technology work really seamlessly. So we want to leverage your school's SSO, their sign-in. So you're signing in with your college account rather than having to create another account. Everything is sort of really seamlessly integrated into the school experience. So they don't even necessarily know that they're jumping to another tool all the time. When we first started doing some of the studies that Katie talks about, we learned very quickly that we had to actually add screenshots because people weren't even really aware. They knew they knew like, oh, I'm going into talent to talent or whatever it was, and not thinking of like that was a separate tool. They were just accessing it through their systems and they didn't really realize that it was not even part of Canvas or Blackboard or whatever it was that they were using. So we'll work really closely with your tech team to get that set up. It's all super standard. So those tech integrations typically take literally a couple of days to get up and running. Nothing that requires like deep programmer time or developer time on the side of the institution. We work with a contact, typically somebody who's the champion of the community, maybe will be the moderator going on. And then, obviously somebody to kind of who wants to know at a stakeholder level how things are going. So we don't need a ton of resources. It's not a big time commitment. Typically we'll meet with folks once a week while things are getting set up. And then after that, we can go as, sometimes we meet monthly, sometimes we meet every few weeks. Really, the goal is to stay in touch, be available, keep tuning the communities to make sure that they're healthy in the way that you want them to be. We provide a lot of reporting and feedback and consulting, really just to make sure that you're getting the results out of the community that you want to get.
Awesome. Thank you, Anna. Any questions pop in for Anna, Danielle?
Not at this point, no.
Okay, great. So if you have questions about implementation or post-implementation, actually, why don't we do this? Anna, do you mind talking just for 1 minute about what it looks like to engage with your team once the community is launched?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we meet kind of frequently until it's launched. And then afterwards, we'll meet with you. We were provide like, how were the first 30 days kind of analysis to say like, are these things going the way that you want them to go? We love to get product feedback. So we really don't want to be building this in a vacuum. So we love to hear from the actual users. And so that can be, the moderators, that can be the students, really how it's going, what are features that are working well, what features do they want to see going forward. So we really want it to be a true partnership. And then, as I mentioned before, we do provide really some advice around best practices. So if you're thinking, I wanted to see this kind of interaction, I'm not seeing this, we can help steer and tweak things to make sure that you're seeing the kind of interaction that you want to see. We don't want to be cluttering up your calendars. So we won't, if you don't want to meet weekly, we don't have to meet weekly. It sort of varies based on what makes sense for the organization. But we really do, the person who does your implementation is the person who works with you on an ongoing basis. So we really, as I mentioned, are really trying to build a strong partnership so that you're getting out of it what you wanted to get out of it.
Awesome.
You mentioned 30-day reporting. I know I've had partners that have reached out to me like annually for reporting. Can you talk about some of the other reports that you provide that give insight into ROI?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at things again, sort of based on the kind of reporting that makes sense in your organization. Some organizations that are really tied to, their fiscal year because they start terms every month, we will provide reporting to saying like, how did last, summer look compared to this summer? How many students are in there starting conversations. We talk a lot about different types of users in the community. Not everybody is a conversation starter. Some people are just active listeners. So, what does that population look like? How is their behavior? Is that growing? Is it not growing? We do a lot of, we have a lot of folks that have been with us for multiple years. So, we like to do a lot of comparison. How does this look compared to the same time period last year? How did we know we turned on this feature for you all in January, for example? How did that impact things? Did it impact things? Did you see a shift in student behaviors based on different things that you've been trying? So, not just that like 30-day ongoing looking at the reports, we also have a lot of data that institutions can pull themselves too. So, as Katie said, a lot of these studies were done by the institutions. In some cases, we didn't know they were doing them until they were over, because they had pulled that data themselves as far as how did the participation in their communities look and who was in there. So it allows you to be really nimble with what you want to look at from a data perspective.
Thank you. Yeah, I know we have partners that love those analytics that you pull for them, and they'll ask me for them sometimes too.
I do too. It's a real, I can spend more time than I'm proud of just like digging through the data. It's really interesting. I don't blame them.
Awesome. All right, well, let's talk about some of the sort of key things that students would be experiencing inside the community. So, the majority of the interaction in the community is happening through these conversations that are primarily initiated by students, sometimes by moderators. The number one thing that we see, especially when we first launch communities or a new semester starts, is students just coming in to introduce themselves. And they will say, where they're coming in from. A lot of times we get pictures of pets. People talk about a little bit about their particular circumstances, if they have kids, if they're returning to school. But it's a really quick and easy way for students to find other people that sort of feel like them, reflect their own backgrounds and interests. And again, sort of immediately start to create that sense of belonging. Like, oh, I really do. This really is where I should be. I really can do this. As Anna alluded to, once you're in there, students start to get comfortable, start to post. The impact of peer-to-peer support is really hard to overstate. Every semester, we will have somebody come in and say something along the lines of what you see here, which is, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed, or I'm not sure I can do this, or, oh my gosh, it's been 20 years since I was in school. Is this really the right decision for me? There's a lot of self-doubt, especially with adult learners when they are coming to school. And it's one thing to get a coach or an advisor to say, yes, you can do it. Don't worry about it. We're here for you. It is a very different thing to have one of your fellow students step in and say that. Somebody who is walking in your shoes or has been where you were and has then succeeded. And so that is a huge part of what happens in these spaces.
Oh, Katie, there is a question in the chat. We have a faculty member in the chat that would like to get a better understanding of how to get leadership buy-in, as well as maybe you could talk a little bit about the different types of communities that we have on like a smaller scale versus like an enterprise level.
Yeah, great question. So one of the nice things about Inscribe is that you don't have to start at the institutional level. You can absolutely pick a smaller subset of learners, maybe an individual program or maybe first year students, kind of depends on where you sit in the organization, and start to deploy communities there. And what we have seen is once you deploy and you start to demonstrate the value of that space, both for you and for your learners and for outcomes, it becomes a showcase that all of a sudden everybody says, oh, we could do that same thing over here and add value, and over here and add value. And so it's a way for it to gain momentum as you have that into that first use case that really showcases the value. I think the other piece is really about the ROI of these spaces. And I'm going to have Erin talk about that in just a minute, but not only is Inscribe something that's fairly easy to implement, it also is not particularly expensive relative to what you've seen in the market. So it's very cost effective. And when we think about the fact that it is influencing things like retention and persistence, It doesn't take a lot to actually pay for itself and then give money back to the institution. So when it comes to leadership, that's often part of the conversation that we want to have, right? Like, what is the value to the members of our school, but then also what is the value back to the institution itself? In fact, I think we have a next section, which is on institutional benefits. So is there another question in the chat, or can I jump into this as part of that answer?
Let's go ahead and jump on in because we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay. So when we think about institutional benefits, one is scalability. We had one institution, we did some work with Arizona State University, and one of their groups did an evaluation, and they had an 80% reduction in the number of individual emails that they were getting. I mean, they went from thousands down to, hundreds or under 100. So it was, we can't sort of understate the impact that a community like this can have on the scalability of resources at your institution. And so if you're growing, but you're also thinking about things like budget constraints and hiring constraints, you have to be able to put in a system that's going to allow you that flexibility to continue to expand enrollment without having to expand staff at the same rate. So Inscribe is a tool that can really facilitate that, which I think especially today resonates with a lot of leadership. It meets students where they are. So what I really think about here is it's optimized for the online learner. It's optimized for the non-traditional student. So again, if you're an institution that has historically been an on-ground, but you're starting to lean into online, or you're really looking at online as the place where you're going to see the most growth, you need a different tool set to serve those students. And so this is a tool that can give you that ability to scale your support services, scale what you've been doing with your in-person students, but optimize it for that particular learner. And then, of course, it's giving you information back about your learners. This is a little more long tail, but there's two sets of, well, I would say it this way. The data that you get out of Inscribe is data that you're not getting from any other platform. It's not just, did they show up to class? Did they get an A? It's actual qualitative data about what your students are thinking and feeling. It gives you insights into the things that they're worried about and excited about that you don't get anywhere else. So you can really then act on those to improve workflows, improve communication strategies, offer additional services that really meet your students where they need you to be. Hopefully I answered that question. I am going to turn it over to Erin to talk a little bit about ROI, which is tied to that question as well, and then we can circle back and do any additional final questions that have come in. Does that work, Danielle?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Awesome. You there, Erin?
I am. Yeah. Hopefully my Wi-Fi holds out. So apologies if it goes out at any point. I think there's four questions that institutions that are considering Inscribe have to answer before they kick off a project. I think we have three already answered through this webinar. Will students actually use it? And we know Katie spoke to our high adoption rates among students, 80, 90% are quite common. Number two, will this have a substantial impact on our strategic initiatives around retention, driving positive student outcomes, fostering a sense of belonging? I think we've done a good job. I think that the third of answering that. The third question is, can we shoulder the internal lift required to launch and support Inscribe? And Honest team is terrific at doing that through sort of our white glove approach. The lift required by our institutional clients is minimized. And then the fourth question is, can I afford this slash will it deliver a substantial enough return on investment? So we know through the outcomes, the impact on retention, the reduction, as Katie spoke to, in some sort of duplicate inquiries. We create some efficiencies there. From a retention standpoint, for most institutions, it only our sort of commercial model requires only a handful of students to be retained to pay for it. Usually one at a public or private institution, and closer to 4 or 5 within community colleges. So it is quite significant. We are, as a company, our investors are impact investors focused on the impact that we have on institutions and the students they support. So we don't feel the same pressures to sort of squeeze every dollar out of our customers as maybe some educational technology platforms do. So I think that helps us keep things reasonable. We're always happy to provide pricing as you discuss, and we keep our sort of the pricing fair and equitable across the institutions that we serve. So with that said, I know we don't have a lot of time left. I'll hand it back over to Katie.
Thanks, Erin. Thank you. So Danielle, were there any additional questions that we should try to touch on in the last 5 minutes?
We don't have any questions, but before we leave today, we will be here for the next 5 minutes. So if you have questions, please drop them in the chat.
Perfect. Awesome. So I kind of glanced over this slide. You can read the quote, but the other thing I will say is, I think a lot of companies will say we take a partnership approach. We take a partnership approach, and I know that many institutions have been burned by folks that will say that, but actually work like vendors. That is not us. We have really strong relationships with the partners that we work with. So much so that if you are thinking about Inscribe or this type of strategy, we are happy to connect you with leaders across those institutions and they are happy to share with you their experience, their tips and tricks, the outcomes that they've seen. We consider the folks that we work with also a community of learning and practice. And so we like to bring folks together to help share those best practices and help everybody be successful. Part of that is we put together what we call the guide. It is a high-level overview of community building, so it provides a lot of tips and tricks, some of the stuff that we touched on today, and some other information. So obviously, it talks about Inscribe, but it's not Inscribe specific. It's really, if you're thinking about building community for your learners, here are some things that you consider. So I know Danielle will drop that link into the chat, and maybe we can include that in the follow-up as well when we send out the recording. Yeah. Other than that, we would love to stay connected. Are we going to have a little inquiry pop up, Danielle?
It will at the end of the webinar.
Okay. So please connect with me. If you are interested in learning more, you can reach out to myself, or we're going to have a little pop up in a second that will ask you if you're interested in maybe connecting with Erin or myself to learn more about Inscribe for your use case. But even if you're not ready, please reach out to me here or on LinkedIn. I love to know what other people are doing in this space. We would love to just continue to learn from you as you maybe learn from us. And we really, thank you so much for being here with us today and for taking some time